Hello and welcome to the International Gaming Standards Association webinar. My name is Mark Pace and I'm the Managing Director of GSA Europe. These webinars are based on the topics that are covered in the Conversations YouTube video series. You can access those conversation videos by clicking on the YouTube logo at the bottom right of the main iGSA.org website. I would like to start by thanking our panelists for taking the time to participate in this webinar, focusing on how G2S can help suppliers boost their sales and, more importantly, the tools that can simplify the process for suppliers implementing G2S. We have a great panel comprised of representatives from two companies that have been at the very forefront of G2S tool development. A couple of housekeeping items. If you have a question, please click on the Q&A button, which you'll find at the bottom of the Zoom window, and type in your question. If you wish to ask a question of a specific panelist, please identify that panelist's name in your question. We've got GSA staff that will be monitoring the questions submitted, and we'll either answer the questions in line during the webinar or we'll group them and then address them by topic in the Q&A section. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the iGSA.org website by clicking on that same YouTube icon off the main page. GSA is very grateful to these panelists who have very generously agreed to share their gaming industry experience and their time with us. So I'll ask each one of them to give a short biography of themselves after I introduce them. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First, from Comtrade, Mr. Igor Russ, Director of Systems. Hi, Igor.
Thank you, Mark, for having me here. Thank you for GSA. Thank you for all attendees. So would like to spend some minutes just to explain a little bit about myself. So Comtrade is actually a technology group that it's involved in different type of businesses. So we have like a lot of businesses as well in US. We work with major infrastructure technology groups in US like Citrix, like HP. We are partners 20 years with them. Nutanix, for example, and then we have offices in Ireland, in Slovenia, and in Serbia, in the Philippines, in Manila. So basically what we do is helping regulators with different tools. So we do provide some central monitoring systems as well around the world, but we as well help some of the industry participant as well with the tools that I will explain later when we go through. So we provide G2S EGM stacks, we provide G2S host stack, and of course central monitoring systems for ministries of finance, but as well server based on gaming based on G2S. So my background is I started working at a casino with the largest leading group here in Europe with 4,000 slot machines and quite a lot of tables. So I was deputy of slot manager. So I understood like how difficult it is sometimes to move like slot machines from one area to another. So then I was a CRM manager, so I took over all the loyalty club implementation in as well this leading group in Europe, and I was GM of a property, and then I did some consulting for also some gaming companies, and then I joined Comtrade like 5 years ago, where I do my role as director of systems. So this is like me.
All right, very good. Welcome. And next we have from Radical Blue Gaming, Mr. Fred Barrie, who's a lead software developer. Hey, Fred.
Mark, thank you for having me today. I have been in the gaming industry for 20 plus years. I started off in, Bally systems at the time, and I've been working on basically the SDS system and the first Tito implementation that the Bally's did. And I, from there I was the architect, and then I transitioned over to RadBlue, where we provide a lot of the industry, the G2S tools that they are used to develop both the host side and the slot machine side of the G2S protocol. We have a lot of different tools, which we'll be going into later on about all of that stuff. And my role at RadBlue is the lead engineer on all G2S products. So everything from the RGS and the RPA, which we'll be talking about later, to the CVT. I've been instrumental in the implementation and deployment of those tools.
Fred will call you the G2S guru moving forward. All right, so we've got a few questions that we'll go through, and if you don't mind, Igor, I think I'll start with you. Contract has been, as you said, providing a G2S software stack solution for a number of years. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what the solution is, what versions of G2S you support, and also maybe how you handle G2S updates when they come out?
So yeah, we developed for as I told previously, we developed like host side of a stack and then EGM side of a stack. So for EGM stack was we have a like full implementation of the GSA standard 2.1 and 3.1. So some of them being in use now currently in different jurisdictions like Greece and Illinois and other jurisdictions. So we have all classes now for 3.1 supported. And this is like a low resource consumption. It's written in C++. It's cross-platform, Windows or Linux. It's SOAP and WebSocket based protocol, transport protocol. It's point-to-point, so and multicast transport. Then it's let's say, for example, normally we're also discussing like the several host support. We support like up to 6 hosts on our stack. So media display, of course. EMDI 3.0. So then we have support from smart cards and USB tokens. And then, you know, we also, because normally the customers comes with their platform, they're written in some other languages. So it can be C#, it can be Java. So we have as well the additional interface layer. So the people are able then to integrate our light stack into the, so it's it needs like probably 50 mega of RAM, NVRAM. So it's like minimal requirement. So it's very light. It's it has its own persistence. So yeah. So this is about it on the technical perspective of our stack.
A question that came to mind as you were saying that, in some cases, some of the hosts that an EGM might be connecting to might have a proprietary message or a proprietary extension to G2S. Do you guys also provide those, or is that then up to the client of the G2S slot machine stack to do?
Oh, that's a very good question, Mark. So no, when we get to the customer, for example, when they take our stack, they get the support with it. So we're supporting them even with the extensions that normally is done and then included actually in the, it's a client extension. So normally they're doing it for certain jurisdiction because some, for example, let's say operator in Canada wants to have some kind of extension. So normally it's then later included in, as well into G2S. We are following the client, so we are implementing that as soon as possible as client requires. So this is also one thing. All of our clients that purchased our stack also use our support with it. So we are as well on frontline because, for example, we implemented the WebSockets like first in the industry. And the other thing I wanted also to mention, referring to a colleague from RadBlue, so we are very complementary because we are also trying to uh, instruct our customers to use actually their testing tools with our stack, because we have this stack on EGM side. So to be able to test it well, we recommend the RadBlue tools.
That's great. And that's what a wonderful intro to my next question to Fred. You know, as we've been discussing, Radical Blue has developed a number of tools. You mentioned a couple of them a little while ago, specifically, of course, focusing on G2s. There's two of them that you mentioned that if you could touch on. One is the protocol analyzer, and the other one is the G2s Scope. Can you talk a little bit about those and what they do?
Sure. The protocol analyzer, or what we call RPA, you'll see that with the RadBlue tool sets, there's a lot of R's that are used because we like to keep our name in it. But the RadBlue protocol analyzer, it's basically, I mean, if you think of Wireshark, you got a very good idea of what's going on. And what happens is the EGMs can connect to the RPA as if it's a host. And then the RPA then reconnects to the host as an EGM. And the RPA is managing the few little changes that we have to do. Basically, when the host configures the URLs, we have to do a little bit of rewriting so that the traffic keeps coming back to us through the RPA, because if you didn't, it would just magically go to the host. So we manage that, and what happens is when you're in the middle of that conversation, now you can actually capture it, you can translate it or transfer it from development teams to QA teams or vice versa, or even casinos can send it back to the manufacturers and say, this is what we're seeing on the floor. It's a lot easier than trying to get log messages from a floor controller, because the log messages have a whole bunch of information and you're really just trying to find the XML in that haystack. Then the other thing that's really great about the RPA is because we're in the middle, we can disrupt communications so that you can test, make sure if your retry logic is working properly, because we just disconnected and it's really hard to disconnect exactly when you want to, but with the RPA, you click a button and you're disconnected. We also have the ability to delay the message or resend the message. And also with the RPA, you can have really remote debug sessions in that one of our customers, actually two of our customers, had an RPA in Las Vegas. So the slot machine was connected to the RPA, and then through a VPN to Reno, that was connected to another RPA that then was hooked to a host. And both engineering teams could actually look at the same message and say, nope, you did that wrong, I did this wrong. It was very useful, and it saved them traveling time, which was great. The other tool that we have is the G2s Scope. That is almost universally used for testing slot machines. I'm not going to say it's 100%, but it is a lot of the industry is using it, and it is a compliant host. So it tries to do everything properly. There are some hosts that have special if logic that, you know, if it's an IGT slot machine, do this. If it's a side game, do that. We don't do any of that stuff. It's a great second host, so that when you're trying to develop a bonusing host or a monitoring system like Comtrade, you can have the RGS do all of the, you know, bookkeeping as far as player tracking and vouchers and stuff like that. And you can then focus on the bonus system and know that when your host goes into a casino floor where it's the secondary auxiliary host, it's going to work properly. It can script, it can do a whole bunch of different things. So the RGS is used a lot, as Igor said. We get stack traces, or not stack traces, but debugs from Comtrade customers, and we go through and we understand what's going on, and then we try to say, okay, we think this is on your side or it's on our side. And so there's a lot of conversation that goes on, and always we're trying to get everybody towards a proper implementation.
That's great. So it sounds like these tools are very beneficial for a development, for a manufacturer, development house looking to implement G2S. It really gives you a leg up because, like you said, you can see what's going on with the RPA, and then the scope gives you that additional boost to be able to simulate a real host without any of the extraneous stuff that might, potentially trip
Exactly.
you up.
And the other thing is most development shops, the host group and the EGM group, they don't even talk to each other. So trying to get one implementation to talk together, it's almost impossible. So we're a great middle person for that.
That's great. Thank you, Fred. Igor, coming back to you. As you said, you've sold the G2S stack to numerous suppliers that are using it to jumpstart their entry into the G2S world. To the extent that you're able to share with us, can you tell us, maybe give us an example of who some of those customers are and why are they adopting G2S?
I mean, I have to be frank with it and tell you like that the RadBlue team, has direct a lot of customers as well into our direction. I would like to thank them for that because, as I told before, we are very complementary in what we do. Like we're delivering the stock for our clients, and then they're using the tools that the RadBlue is having. So that's been said in, for example, in Europe, actually, in Austrian market, when we implemented the monitoring system there, G2S monitoring system. So what happened now is over 12,000 machines connected. So what we got was like a lot of requests, even from the companies that already started to do their own implementation of a stack. We won like quite some of the deals, and one of them being Novomatic group of companies, then Amatic, Apex, Gauselmann, the biggest German company. Mm-hmm. We all received them because of the Austrian market, and we developed the stack for them, even though that Novomatic was doing that for quite some time, I think, and they choose us later. And then as the other companies saw the news, we are producing this stack, and that's been like our guys' focus for a number of years. We're starting to get traction as well on the other continents. So we implemented 2 American companies, so Blue Synergy and recently Incredible Technology. We have as well 2 in pipeline that, of course, I cannot name because we haven't signed the deal yet, but they are very interested into our stack. Hopefully some of them are listening to this conversation. But, and the latest what we got is, then of course, a Japanese company, Aruse. And we have EGT as well. Promatic from Poland, and there are some companies that I cannot name at this time because we are under NDA. So why did they choose our stack, and which markets they're interested in? Firstly, I said it's Austria, where we implemented that whole solution. Then it's Greece. I haven't mentioned the UK-based company Inspired, that was very focused on the VLT market in Greece. So we connected to the intelligence system, IGT intelligence system with our stack. And I think Inspired went, I know for a fact, Inspired went as well to Illinois with the same product. And now I believe they're talking to some other clients using G2S. So yeah, that's being said, Canada is also like interesting market, I believe, for some of the vendors. They're very much interested to enter that market. And lately, I must tell you that Illinois is very much on the radar of our clients, but as well, on the same page, I would say, because we also do server-based gaming solutions. There are also some clients that want to join forces for they provide the platform and we would provide the server side. And lastly, I would say in the Illinois, because there's a change of law, as you might know, there's I think 6 instead of 5 machines in that market allowed. And I haven't mentioned that Scientific Games as well bought our host stack that then implemented into their solution as well. So, and I heard from the Inspired, for example, in Illinois, they immediately connected. So there was no issue. They didn't have any issues with connecting on the second market, for example, because they were already connected with IGT Intelligent. And then they wanted to connect to the to Illinois Scientific Game System, and there were no issues at all with the G2s stack. So
That's great. So you mentioned a large number of companies that have implemented G2s using your stack as a means to do it faster. You mentioned a number of jurisdictions that have mandated G2s or use G2s. It's interesting because one of the YouTube sessions that we recorded a little while ago was actually talking about how G2s can enable some of the smaller suppliers to enter markets that might be close to them right now. Canada has a huge market right now. There's a finite number of suppliers with G2s. Now all of a sudden, through your tool in partnership, because you guys are both saying you work together with RadBlue's tools, it seems like you're opening up the doors to more companies to come in, to more products being available to those operators. And ultimately, it's really good for the industry, right? Players get more variety. The operators get to provide better products and different products to our customers. And it's a really great thing. So thank you for sharing that with us.
But if I may add also,
Yep.
if I may add something as well, because some of the operators, some of the vendors as well, they build like the first stack just very tightly to integrate it into their platform. So when they need to change teams and redo the new platform, then they have to redo the stack, and that's not the case with our solution, which is like a stack and you can integrate it fastly into a platform.
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's very important. Let's see. Fred, we talked about the RPA, we talked about the scope, but there's another tool that you mentioned you were the lead developer or architect of that is very near and dear to GSA's heart, and that is the certification and validation tool, right? Obviously, this is something that the testing tools, GLI, BMM, and others are using, and they find it very useful. Do you believe that it's something that regulators should be using as well?
Yes, I think that the regulators are in the position where they are either hands on or hands off. I mean, there's really two different types of regulators that we deal with, but with both cases, with the CVT, you can see what the test is that we're going to be doing because we document and we say you do X, Y, and Z, and the following should happen. And then you do the next test and you say X, Y, and Z. And so the regulator could go through our laundry list of tests and say, for our jurisdiction, this must be done. This must be done. This must be done. Or it doesn't match the law or the reg that they're trying to enforce. So then what can happen is the CVT, they can say these are the tests that has to be run, and then the manufacturers and the test labs can then execute those test sessions and say, yes, they do pass, and it's independent test, it's a repeatable test. And then probably the biggest thing is we don't have each vendor's organizational biases because If you go to IGT, you always do it this way. If you go to Side Games or WMS, you always do it this way. And even at some vendors, you might have one protocol implemented 5, 6, 10 times, like Igor was talking about, because each team had to have their own implementation. And so you might have one protocol implemented 10 different ways. And which one is correct? Well, you don't know because you got that bias of the organization, where the CVT is created by RadBlue and reviewed by the industry standard committee, the CIC committee, and they say, yep, you guys did it right. We bless it. We're good. And then everybody is on the same page. It's starting to roll out. It hasn't made it all the way out, but I think it's going to be there. And then, as I was saying before, the regulators, there's some kind of hands off as far as like actually physically testing slot machines. But for the ones that actually go in and test slot machines, they can actually run the CVT and say, yes, it does indeed match what our criteria is. And then RadBlue working with iGSA, we are very interested in, if we don't have a test yet that you need, we'll implement it and we'll get it in front of the committees to make sure that we did it properly. And then you can then go forward and say, for all slot machines that come into, like, say, Canada, and they're going to implement mystery awards, you have to match these test sessions. And some of the issues that you would see now become a little bit mute, because everybody on the slot machine side is doing the same way. And the host vendors, they get to see what is expected of them, and they can make sure that they're coding to the accepted well-known standards versus staying in the dustier corner cases that really cause the problems.
Right. And just to elaborate on a point that you made, the CIC, which is the Certification and Interoperability Committee within GSA, that committee is comprised of engineers from a variety of supplier members of GSA. So it's not like you've got, you mentioned IGT, Side Games, you've got engineers from all of the major suppliers sitting there, and they're taking the test cases that are being created, they're testing them with their machines, and they're coming back and saying, yep, we all agree this is to the spec as G2S was required, and it does work, and we've tested it, and it's good, and they discuss any tweaks that are needed, and then they essentially vote to actually approve and release the test case. So it's not RadBlue by themselves doing it, it's not one or two suppliers, it's really a cross-section of the industry. And I should also say that many of those engineers are actually in the Q&A side of those companies, so they know what they're talking about because they do the testing.
They do the testing, yeah. And you know, when we first did the first few test cases, there was a lot of aha, we didn't know you could do it that way, or that's not how we do it. And there was some clarifications that came out because of that. But that's the whole point, is that we're trying to get a clarity of the protocol so everybody does it the same, so that we can get to the point where more vendors can go into, like Igor was saying, that they can connect easily to the second, third, fourth host that isn't the same manufacturer. And that's what we're going for.
That's great. And actually it tees up a question that I have for Igor, which is, okay, so this is great. A whole bunch of companies are implementing G2S. We've got these great tools that can really help us understand what's going on as we're actually developing it and seeing messages and being able to give it to developers and Q&A guides. But here's a question, right? I mean, we say, we being GSA, that using the tools that are out there, it really kind of speeds up the implementation of G2S and allows a manufacturer to get to market faster. Is that really true, Igor? I mean, how fast, you've had lots of experience, how fast does it take, how long does it take for a manufacturer to implement G2S stack and get it running?
I mean, you know, the G2S like 3.1, maybe it's 3,500 pages or even more. So it's like it's difficult to start with it, and then like we've done this path because we started like years ago, and we went down this road, and then it was more about the firstly, like for example, like how long would somebody needs to develop this stack on his own? So this is the question that it's really depends like on different factors. So for example, for taking our stack, we always advise clients, to be fast to the market, because for example, like in Austria, there's just 10 classes needed out of 37. Of course, with our stack, they would get all 37. But for example, with you don't need to implement it to implement all of them. For example, if you don't have coins, why do you want to have a coin class or something like that? So then in Greece, I believe there are 18 classes. So it's different on the market needs. So we always advise them to do that. So in our case, when we give them stack, it also depends how much they are familiar with the G2s, whether they read something, whether, so this is one thing. Then the other thing is like how their platform is like, can they do, have they envisioned, for example, a download or something like that. So it all really depends, but I would say like 3 developers from the vendor side, for example, in 6 months, with the help of one of our developers to help them with that. They would need like a 6 month for some jurisdiction, for example, without PUI or even with PUI implemented.
But that's pretty quick, right? 6 months, and to your point, it's true. The G2s protocol document is 3,500 pages, but you don't have to implement all 3,500 pages. You mentioned Greece requires 18 classes, some require less, so it's a smaller portion of the G2s protocol that you would need to implement. However, I think you also said something that's very important, and I want to highlight this. Even if people being companies are buying your stack, it is good for their developers to have some experience, some exposure perhaps to what G2s does. And we're talking about tools. GSA actually has 2 tools that we offer for educational purposes. One is an online self-paced G2s course, very economical, it's completely online and really easy to do. And the other one is you guys know Ethan Tower, who's our protocol director. If a company wishes for Ethan to come out and do a hands-on, 5-day presentation on G2s, he's not going to write code, but he will give you all of the background on G2s, so that, to your point, Igor, you're not looking at this thing from scratch. You've got some foundation with which to sort of, start.
Yeah, exactly. And for example, we also do, like, for example, when we start with the clients, it's different type of clients, right? So normally we start with a workshop that, our guy, our lead engineer would go on site with a customer and spend some time and do some simple integration and, trying to explain as well the things that they might are not aware of. And also what are the, and also to familiarize himself with the platform, they would like to integrate the stack into, so, and to give them suggestions based on that. And so, yeah, and then from that week on, actually it's one engineer from our side would do integration with a team of normally 2 or 3 people from the vendor side and do the integration.
That's great. Fred, I'm going to go back and touch on something related to the CVT, because obviously we're talking about test scripts. It is called a certification and validation tool, so it certifies and it validates. Can you talk a little bit about how that certification or the validation of the host and the EGM works? I mean, I think on the EGM side, it's probably pretty straightforward, but can you talk a little bit more about kind of how that works?
Sure. On the EGM side, we have the CVT tool has literally a laundry list of test cases that test different requirements of the protocol.
And if I could interrupt you, we're calling it a tool. It's an application, right?
It's an application, absolutely.
Runs on a laptop.
It can run on a laptop. It can run on a desktop system, and what it allows you to do is, connect your EGM to the CVT, and through a user interface, you say, I want to test this slot machine. I want to test the following template or test session template, which is just the test that you want to execute. And then you have a choice to either test interactive tests, non-interactive, or both. So for example, you have a QA engineer for about 8 hours a day, maybe really about like 6 hours. So you don't want to be waiting for long running tests while that's going on. You want to do the interactive tests during that time. So there are a lot of requirements. When the cabinet door opens, the following tests or the following events have to happen, the following meters have to happen, the following things have to happen in order. So we basically prompt the user, open the cabinet door, close the cabinet door, play a game, insert money, play a game. But we also have a ton of tests that are non-interactive, and so you can just run those overnight. And basically when the slot machine is disconnected, and make sure it does the following 5 things, and we verify all of those things. So from a slot machine's point of view or an EGM's point of view, we can really dial in the test to exactly what you want to do. From a host point of view, that's a lot harder to test a host, because it's almost impossible to say, okay, I want you to create a bonus for this player for exactly $10. That's not how hosts are written. They're more like XYZ happened, and now I'm going to give you what's in the pool. So it's a lot harder to do that. So what the industry is kind of coming around to is we take certified slot machines and we test it with the host. And that way, that the host is working properly because the slot machines are working properly. But there's also a benefit from the CVT in that we document what the tests are. And so when you're writing your host, you can say, am I doing the function the way that everybody is expecting? Because if you read the 3,500 pages and you don't quite get this one must not, you could be in a weeds someplace. And it's pretty easy to get into the weeds sometimes. So that's where the benefit of the CVT, even just the documentation of the CVT, is useful. And then, as I've stated before, when the host is going out and saying, okay, for Illinois, we need you to implement the following test cases, and then the EGM manufacturers can verify that they did it properly. So again, when issues come up, we can find them, we can write test cases, and then we can execute them, and hopefully we don't get regressions over time.
And I think it's worth mentioning that for our audience, sometimes they might hear GSA staff refer to the golden standard. We refer to the CVT as the golden standard implementation. So when an EGM is tested against it and it passes, we know that because the CVT was, again, reviewed by the CAC committee, we know that if that EGM passes, it's really per the spec. And that's why, to your point, we can use it to test the host because we've got a known entity that is good.
Right.
So great explanation. Thank you. Let's see. Regulators and CVT, regulators and just G2S in general. So Igor, obviously you probably spend or Comtrain spends most of its time talking to clients who are interested in implementing G2S. Do you spend time talking to regulatory authorities and explaining, why G2S is valuable? Is that something that you guys do?
I mean, we regularly have meetings with regulators. Some of them they kind of reach out to us, but some of them they heard about our story in Austria. Some of them they heard about our story in New South Wales, where we partner with TapCorp, where we provide a part of solution for G2S. Uh, so, and then, you know, normally now the regulator, what they want is like cover both, like online gaming and slot machines. So G2S and systems. So as you know, there is something cooking as well in GSA about on that part of a system side. But yeah, especially when I focus on G2S and game to system protocol, we have like let's say about 7-8 conversations a year with different regulators about that. And there is always a question about the, you know, I have existing market that is not G2S, and how can I transfer I mean, how can I come from the existing market to the new market with all G2S? So I'm having actually now the discussion with one regulator about that. And in the past, I've spoke also to one of the US regulators. So what are some trying to do in Austria? That was the case that they started to implement, for example, for new machines, there's a regulation, they have to be G2S, but for the old ones, you know, they can stay SAS, but they have to have like converter boards, so they can report G2S to the monitoring system, and they could still have a SAS casino management system on the same time. So so this is mainly the discussions. I also go like to the GSA meetings during the ICE and during the Vegas show. But also I'm visiting Jager, International Association of Gaming Regulators, Nickel G's, and some of these events where I try to tell a little bit regulators about that. They are all afraid of that moment that I mentioned. And then the other thing is like they're afraid it's going to be like super costly and a system like that. But I can assure all the regulators this doesn't have to be very expensive. It can be done in the optimized way for their market. And then on the other hand, regulators, some of the regulators want also to have like some kind of a server-based, state-controlled slot machines. And we are also we are in discussion with some of them to for the implementation of a G2S as a mandatory for this kind of a solution. But yeah, as we were talking about the benefits for them, of course, PUI, I would say responsible gaming, AML, instant data access. I mean, you can have like granular data at whenever you want. And then, you know, there is we're talking 2020 and we still have a converter boards from RS 232 into the internet. So I think these things are obsolete, totally obsolete. And I just hope this will change in the period to come.
Great answer. If you were in front of me, I'd give you a big hug. A lot of what you said is exactly some of the things that we communicate to regulators on a regular basis. I will tell you though, one of the issues that I hear when I talk to regulators is, well, not a lot of suppliers have implemented G2S. I think regulators need to listen to today's webinar because you went through easily a dozen companies in addition to the, you know, what are considered the big five that have implemented G2S. So there are lots of suppliers that have G2S implemented in their products now, and it's no longer, you know, going to be a quote unquote monopoly for a couple of manufacturers. So great answer. And I'm hoping that things will start to change because I do agree with you that old stuff is in fact obsolete. Fred, we've talked about a bunch of G2S tools Does Radical Blue do anything else with any other GSA standards that you'd like to talk about?
Well, we have both a slot machine simulator and a load tester. So again, when you're implementing, the host stack from Comtrade, and you want to test to make sure that you know your interfacing to that stack is actually done properly, you can have a slot machine simulator where you can configure it almost infinitely, which a real slot machine, by the time you reconfigure it, you have to RAM clear it and you take 20 minutes and it's a pain. Whereas with our slot machine simulator, it's pretty quick to switch between an ID reader that is host owned versus an EGM controlled, and making sure that you're doing the set ID validations properly. And then what we can do is then take that same slot machine and put it into our load tester, so all the same pieces are working together. And now you can verify that when you have a voucher system and you go and you print a voucher, that it actually prints within 5 seconds. Whereas, when I implemented Tito the very first time, we could get one slot machine to print a ticket, no problem. 500 or 1,000 slot machines, that became a much bigger problem. And we didn't have the tools to actually simulate that load. And so it was learning on the casino floor, which is never a good idea. I've done it. I don't expect anybody else to ever do that. And then we have also basically a reference implementation of the slot machine in a Java, so you can see the communication stack. So you can actually look at the code, you can see it, and then what the nice thing about, like with RadBlue, is you buy our products, you also buy questioning us. And so we work with you and we try to understand what you're doing. And then we also try to show you, well, this is how you can do it. This is how you can implement it. Why are you doing it that way? That's not really how most slot machines do it. And try to guide people.
It sounds like actually both companies, both RadBlue and Comtrade, build those relationships with the clients. It's not I sell you this and I walk away. It's a long-term engagement. Igor mentioned, there's an engineer that sits down with them and understands and helps guide, and that's a great way to build a long-term relationship and satisfied customers. So these tools are fantastic. Obviously, there are companies that are buying them. And this is an open question to both of you. Obviously, they're not free. They come at some cost. So are the markets that require G2S, are they profitable enough from your perspective to justify? I mean, I think I know the answer to the question, but are they profitable enough to justify the expense for the stack, for these tools to do this work? What do you guys think?
I mean, short answer, yes.
Yeah, the cost of just one engineer, the loaded cost of one engineer easily outweighs the tool cost that you would pay on a yearly basis. And from our point of view, you're getting a whole bunch of stuff that enables your engineers to do work that you would not be able to do yourselves without a small team. And then you get into those biases and stuff like that. And I'm sure it's the same thing with Igor's side. By the simple fact that you had 10 people working on a stack and then you throw it away and you get another 10 people to work on it, and instead of just buying the stack, it's much cheaper.
That's tried and true. It's proven. It's been implemented. As Igor said, the connectivity happens very quickly, and 6 months with 3 engineers. I mean, it could take you a year or longer with double that, and you might still not be ready to go to market and still have issues after you're ready to actually submit for testing. So I like your short answer, Igor. Thank you. And another question, we talked a lot about, we talked a little bit about the regulators and talking to regulators and educating them. We obviously spend a lot of time also talking to operators and suppliers. We go to the same industry trade shows. Igor, we've seen you, we've seen Radical Blue at those events, and we all talk to pretty much the same people. We like to form a partnership. We believe we have a partnership with Radical Blue and with Comtrade, we being GSA. What can we do together, separately, sort of to be singing of that same hymnal, to be evangelizing G2s adoption to regulators, operators, and suppliers? How can we do a better job of that? Do you guys have any ideas?
Yes, if I may, I was so short because I knew we were crossing our time slot. So, but yeah, that is true. But I forgot to mention before when we were talking about benefits for the different players in the industry, I forgot to mention as well download. That was not mentioned for the operators and as well for the regulators, because they have complete control over that, and then it's got as a verification of the software that is on the machine. But saying that, I would say that the regulators, could you help? For example, for the regulators, it could be good that we could have like, and as well with operators, if we could have like some kind of a call with them that it might be focused on the regulators, and then we might have a call with different interested parties, and then we can explain a little bit about solution more in depth. What is their current situation? We could help them with that to understand that. With operators as well, because they sometimes, they just have they don't know whether there is a company that can offer that. And it's difficult to go like completely, to a neutral territory that G2S might be. So, if you could like have some kind of a roundtable or something like that with operators and regulators that we could participate in and explain a little bit more about the solutions that could be available. And for the suppliers, actually, we have a quite good relationship. We kind of know most of them. And we talk to them. Actually, we are, as Radical Blue is and as GSA, we are like Switzerland. We are like independent company. That's why it allows us to work with companies like all plethora of companies that might be very competitive between themselves, but we work with all of them. So we kind of have this kind of a partnership that doesn't cross the line. So we are still independent in that terms of perspective, but we like to have this kind of partnership as well for the other areas that vendors might be interested. So roundtables, like some intro to some of the regulators, operators would great benefit us in spreading news on the G2S.
I would like to add in, I think having, the iGSA keeping the protocols relevant and fresh. So there isn't a new feature that's being implemented differently among similar manufacturers. It would be great if we could get to the point of, driving people to G2S and, offering, to gift their ideas into the protocol so that we all have a common implementation. And then having trainings and, the certification expectations and guidelines so that we can get to a gold standard of implementation.
Yeah, and Mark, we are in 21st century. I mean, like, in industry, you have to adapt. I mean, we're talking about the that all kind of applications there's available today, and we are still getting the data out of the machine on the serial. It's just doesn't make sense for the 21st century anymore, I would say.
Absolutely.
Because it limits the operator, it limits the regulator.
I could not agree more with what you both said. I would like to ask you this though, Igor. We've had conversations with operators, and it's always challenging to figure out who the right individual within the operator, company you have the conversation with. We've had conversations with the slot operators who are not really technologists, and they look at you and they say, well, is this going to make me more money in the slot machine that I buy? Well, perhaps, but perhaps it's more through the marketing, through the data, rich information that you get that can be mined. Maybe through the real-time nature, maybe through the download capabilities, right? If you have the marketing person there, the marketing person would love to get all that data, because today they get a very small amount of data out of the slot machines. Slot machines produce it. It just, to your point, it can't send that over that old pipe. And then sometimes we get the CTO or the CIO, and we start saying that, G2S uses a real network, and all of the tools that you use to manage your back of house network, you can actually use to manage your casino floor network. I mean, their eyes get really big. Who do you talk to?
I mean, we're talking to different operators in Asia, for example, in Australia. So what we're sensing is that, they kind of would like to do the things, but then when it comes to the final step, it doesn't. But as I said before, on the old legacy phones, you didn't have any applications. You couldn't, for example, the money was what you spend on your call. Now it's all different. I mean, people are having bunch of application. Now saying that, there is a big push into the sport betting legislation in US.
Right.
So, it allows you combine the things like land-based and online in the same space. It allows you advertising, allows you a lot of things, especially in PUI I would say as well for regulators, responsible gaming. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be implemented with that. Also to earn more money, but the application themselves, what you can do with it, I would leave that to operators to suggest, because now you have an open platform that can provide you just your playground for the future revenues.
Fred, anything else?
No, I think that covers it.
All right. Well, then, very quickly, because we're running out of time, I'll just do a little summary. First of all, thank you again for your time. I think your answers were great. Obviously, these tools that your companies provide really help companies looking to implement G2S. The stack shortens the amount of time it takes to develop it, and then when it's done right. The CVT, the G2s Scope, and the RPA are tools that can ensure that even if you buy the stack, you see what's going on, and you understand how you're integrating into your existing, EGM code, how it's working with the host. All of these tools really do support those development efforts. And I think, as not to pick on you, Igor, but as you very succinctly said, there obviously is an ROI to implementing G2S. There are numerous markets that utilize G2S, and companies looking to, expand their market share into places where perhaps, they're not in today, can certainly do that using the tools that your two companies produce. And as an added bonus, it seems like you two have a really good working relationship already, and you're very complementary, and that's really cool.
Yes, as I said, we are, this is also one thing for the regulators. We are talking with now, as the thing is expanding, we're talking as well about connecting those betting systems and online gaming systems all to one system that combines all the information about the gaming market, and that's basically based on the GSA new standard that we can discuss at some other point.
All right. I'm sure we'll have more of these. So again, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and thank you for participating. And to our audience members, thank you also for your attendance.